Hello, I'm Jennifer Nielsen. I'm the author of several books for young readers, including The False Prince, A Night Divided, Iceberg, and a lot of other books maybe you've heard of and maybe not, but that's fine because today is not about me. It's about an interview with someone I know you are going to want to hear more about. Now, I've been on the Called to Create podcast before, but as a guest. What an honor it is to be here now as a guest host. I'm humbled by this opportunity, especially because I know how important this podcast is to so many of you as it is to me. Here we speak about the things that matter most. One of those things is our rising generation and how we can help them find their place in this remarkable world. I want to introduce you to someone I've known for a while. I consider her a friend. She has done incredible things for so many young people. This is Jennifer Jenkins. She's the author of 7 published novels and 1 nonfiction guide to creative writing. She is the founder and CEO of a nonprofit called Operation Literacy. She has taught at universities throughout the country and was recognized earlier this year by Utah's First Lady, Abby Cox, for the Honors in Education Award for her work in supporting both reading and writing for our young people. Jennifer, this is a mouthful of accomplishments, and these are only some of your highlights. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh my goodness. Speaking of being humbled, I feel like we should be in a role reversal here. I feel like Jennifer Nielsen should be the one who is being interviewed instead of myself, but thank you for having me. I'm so grateful to be here.
You know, when I was invited to be the guest host for this, they said, "Is there anybody you would like to interview for this?" Yours was the first. It was the only name I even considered. You know, I want to be you one day. And my big question to start is, do you sleep? Because I
No.
you don't know the answer to that.
You know what? I do sleep. I do sleep, but I wake up early and I go to bed late, and there's a lot to fit in a day, Jen. There's just too much to fit in a day.
Yeah, there is. But I want to start with where your story begins. Like, who were you before you became you?
And I assume before I became me, before I started writing and getting into
Yeah,
this.
your early story
Yeah.
before you felt that call, right? Just where did you?
Yeah. So I was a military brat. I moved all around the country. I moved 18 times in 16 years. So before I turned 16 years old. So I think for me, who I was a survivalist. I was somebody who had to learn quickly how to listen. I had to learn how to pick up on dialect and slow down my drawl with the people from the South and keep clip with my New England friends and drop my T's in Utah and all of those things. So that's part of who I am. I also loved story. I spent so much time in a car growing up, literally traveling across country multiple times a year in a car. And I loved listening to stories. I loved listening to my parents tell stories about their childhood. I loved all of that. But I didn't love to read those stories. I was a reluctant reader. I was an undiagnosed dyslexic, and I had a little bit of trauma every time I went into a new school because inevitably I would be asked to read aloud. And that was the time when I signaled basically to the class that I wasn't very smart. But I tested well and I had a good memory and all of those things. But reading was just a struggle for me. I really had a negative association there. But yeah, that's who I was before.
And this is fascinating to me because I know you well enough to know that for you, that kind of signaling to the class, maybe I'm not smart, that cut to your core for you. So for you to believe that maybe you weren't the person you wanted to believe you were, how did that impact your behaviors, your relationships, or your self-identity?
I was a pretty resilient kid. I had a pretty good self-esteem outside of that. I was an athlete and I did okay, but I did feel I always had just a little bit of maybe a chip on my shoulder, maybe something to prove. I wanted to be good and I loved to learn. I loved school, but It was really hard. It was really hard for me to not want to hide. And honestly, I was talking to my mom about this recently. My parents had no idea that I was a struggling reader. They would read to me aloud all the time, but my parents didn't know that I was struggling. And I think that that's a common theme. We want to assume that our children are thriving, and so that's the narrative that we see and believe. And anyway, so yeah, I don't know if that's a great answer to your question, but I was a very determined kid, and so I found workarounds. I found ways to try and hide in the situation.
Yeah, and the workarounds, I think that's what a lot of children do. They find ways to put up the masks and ways to distract and hide. And a lot of times I think that child who is acting out or misbehaving or is the comedian or something, I mean, maybe they're just genuinely that funny and maybe they're hiding.
It's a decoy over here so that you don't see what's happening over here. It's the magician's trick.
Yeah. Yeah. When did it change for you?
I told you I loved stories, right? And so the ultimate place that I could listen to stories was a history degree. I ended up graduating cum laude from UVU in the second most reading intensive major that you can be involved in. And again, the memorization was a big helper to me. But also, I loved learning about people and their experiences and what made them who they were and why they did the things they did. And so I was in a class called Exceptional Students. It was a class that was designed to help secondary ed teachers identify learning disabilities in their students. And we were doing a unit on dyslexia, and I had never been diagnosed. I knew very little about dyslexia going into it. I assumed it was just the thing where words swam, and it's so much more complicated than that. So listening to this professor, I was hearing my story. And I ended up going to this professor after the class and saying, I am dyslexic. I know I am. I've never been diagnosed. And she's just like, it's unlikely, maybe you have a little bit of and she kind of brushed me off. And I was pretty persistent. And she said, let's test you. And she tested me. And she's like, Jen, you are severely dyslexic. And it was so validating. Never in the history of, diagnoses has anybody been so excited to learn that they're dyslexic. For me, it was an affirmation that I'm not stupid. My brain works differently than other people. And I started to, instead of avoiding those words, I started diving into those words and realizing that, wow, I can actually improve my writing if I use some tactics and tools that can be helpful. And I fell in love with this guy that maybe you've known or heard of before. His name's Harry Potter.
I
I
did
started
over the
reading Harry
brush.
Potter as a college grad, and and that was the first book that I'm embarrassed to admit this, but that was the first book that I actually read from cover to cover and enjoyed. And I'm like, is this what reading is? And it's amazing to me that it was the reframing, the disassociation with I'm stupid, or we like things that we're good at, right? And we tend to, as humans, avoid the things that hurt us or that make us feel small. And in this case, that was reading for me. So once I was able to reframe that, reading became like this world that opened up to me. And I became the most voracious reader known to man. I was just constantly had a book in my hand. I remember, this is also something I probably shouldn't admit publicly, but I remember going into a movie theater and needing to go to the bathroom so that I could go hide in a corner and read while my husband was in watching whatever movie we were watching, probably some military thriller that he was super into. But that was who I had become. I had just become like an addict and then started writing later.
You may not have an answer to this question, but I'm really curious about it because I think you have some perspective now and some distance from all of that struggle of becoming a reader and how you got there. And I wonder, as you look at your life now, being dyslexic, what did that do for you in terms of giving to your life?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Several things come to mind quickly. One of them is empathy.
Mm.
I I constantly am working with students who have beautiful ideas They're extremely creative. In my nonprofit work, I'm constantly interfacing with these young creative minds who can't put words together, but they have great ideas. And so I feel empathy in those situations. The other thing that it did for me was it created some resilience. It taught me early that running from hardship is actually not any kind of solution. I learned to climb mountains from that experience.
And I think it's important because, to parents of dyslexic children, or if you're a listener and you happen to, deal with dyslexia yourself, I feel like, God closes a door and he opens windows,
Yeah,
and,
it's true.
and that
Well,
may be added for you.
I
And
remember sitting and when we were reading in class, and I knew my turn was coming up, I would memorize like a full paragraph. I would try and read it over and over again because I'd count down, okay, this is going to be my, or even in church, like going, okay, we're reading like a 20 verses as a class, and I'm going to have verse 17. So I would go and I would memorize verse 17 so that when it was my turn, I could read it fluently and not feel stupid. But the byproduct of that was a very sharp memorization skill that still serves me to this day.
wow. I do want to shift to you talking about you interfacing with young people. And I know you are referencing your nonprofit organization, Operation Literacy. And as full disclosure, I do have a role that I play within Operation Literacy. So if I brag it up, I am not referencing me or anything I have done. I am referencing this amazing organization dedicated to children's literacy. And so can you tell me just what is it, Jennifer, that you do? What is the work?
In all of my grant writing, I try to summarize that, answer that question. And it's really, really hard to do. But Operation Literacy is a nonprofit that, as you said, is dedicated to promoting children's literacy. And we do this with two flagship programs. The first is, if maybe some of the listeners have heard of the Teen Author Boot Camp. It's a conference that was held in Provo for 14 years at the Utah Valley Convention Center and before then at UVU. But this is an event that is evolving into a new convention that's going to be held at the Salt Palace in February on the 21st and 22nd, called StoryCon. But the essence of these conferences and slash convention is that we want to see children. We want to know that we validate them in their creativity. We want them to know that we take them seriously, and we want to provide them with some tools to help them tell their story. So that's a common theme, is we want these kids to tell their story. And so as part of this arm of our nonprofit, we, outside of hosting a conference where children and teens learn about creating characters and building worlds and story structure and all sorts of things about the publishing industry and all of that, we also provide publishing opportunities to these kids. So we publish about 80 teens a year in our short story anthology and poetry collection. And the cool thing is these kids are paid for their work. They have a contract. They go through the editorial process, and then they are celebrated at our annual gala. We put them on the same stage that we put the winners of our National Book Award, the Teen Reader's Choice Award. And so we really try to empower and teach, but also to validate excellence in writing as well. So that's one arm of the nonprofit. The other arm is something, Jen, that you and I obviously share a passion for. And I know you have a big passion for the work that we do on the writing side of things too, but it's the Book Drop arm. Book Drop is a very special program. It's something that just it's why I don't need the sleep, Jen, that you alluded to, because it's so validating and rewarding and fulfilling and needed, desperately, desperately needed. So Book Drop is a program where we connect children from Title I schools who have a socioeconomic need with best-selling authors and free access to books. So, for example, if Jennifer Nielsen was participating in our book drop program, she would come to a school like Granger Elementary, which is where she is actually going on Monday.
You know?
Elementary is a Title I school in West Valley that has 100% free lunch qualifying, meaning there is just a chronic need in this school for an infusion of support, especially where literacy is concerned. And so we come into the school and we provide access to the authors, which usually schools have to pay high honorariums to bring in an author to speak to their school. And that's why statistically, most Title I schools do not get author visits. So it's really, really needed. And instead of just giving these children a book for free, we really try to emphasize giving them the opportunity to interact with this author, be seen by this author. We found that by putting one of these authors in front of these kids, they feel valued, and they also see themselves in the authors that we bring in. They start to dream in ways that they don't usually. So with Book Drop, the author comes in, they do an amazing presentation, and then we give every child at the school a free book from the author. And the book drop that we're doing on Monday at Granger Elementary is actually a fusion of both the Teen Author Boot Camp, StoryCon writing programs, and our book drop program, because the students will get a visit from 4 authors. They'll do mini workshops at the school with author Frank Cole, Jamile Mendez, and Heather Clark, and then Jen Nielsen. And at the end of this little mini workshop, they'll learn that they're taking a library home to their school. They're taking 4 books each home from their school that are signed and they belong to them and they have some ownership there. And statistically, they are so much more likely to actually read those books having met those authors. Jen, I'm going to switch roles with you just a little bit. Why are you involved in Book Drop?
I've seen miracles. I've seen miracles, Jen. And I think that's the point of all of it, is you see this child and what it is for an author to stand up in front of them and say, you are worth my time and my attention. I'll share one brief story just because it meant so much to me. We were at a school here in Utah, and afterward, one of the teachers brought this girl forward, this adorable 4th grade girl who had had an incredibly awful background and an awful year within her background. In fact, awful enough that this teacher was now the child's guardian. This girl wanted to believe she could be a writer. And yet nothing in her background said, oh, of course you can do this. Of course, this is your future. And we did the presentation for her. And afterwards, she said, this is the best day of my life. I'm going to write. And the teacher said it was the first time that year she had seen this little child smile. And she took hold of a dream that maybe there was something bigger for her than the reality which life had presented itself. It's why. And I know you have stories too. Is there one that comes to your mind through Operation Literacy or an interaction that stands out for you that you will never forget?
That's not fair to choose one. It's like choosing one of my children a little bit, because there's so many. I had an incredible experience that I've actually never talked to you about. I was at an alternative school. These were system involved youth that I had come in and was giving away books and did a presentation there as an author. And I had this 16-year-old, and I have to tell you that when I pulled up to the school, there was a kid waiting for me on the curb, casually holding a very poorly written author Jennifer Jenkins sign. But he was waiting for me, and he just looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. And if you had seen this person on the street, you would have probably been a little nervous, not because you're a bad person and judging this person, but just because the cues that you would have been given were, I don't like you, I even might hate you. And he was rough and all of these things. And I ended up doing this presentation, and my purpose was I wanted these students to identify as writers and as creators, regardless of their ability. And this kid ended up writing a story. for me. And it was really hard to read, to be completely honest with you. It was, oh, if you don't know me, I have to tell you, I'm a watering pot all the time. I don't know how I work in this industry. I'm seriously awful. Okay. So it was very hard to read. It was about, and there was character, and I could see his attempt at trying to utilize some of the things that we had talked about. But he was telling his story, and he was projecting this story onto this character whose name was Dan. And I could see the benefit to this young writer to be able to tell his story in a way that was creative. And that provided some separation from his actual really hard life.
I think this young person, he needed, right? He needed to work through because of story, because most young people start out writing about themselves and they will write about their pain, if they know they're writing about it or not, which
Yeah.
means they write for what they need to say. They just need somebody to listen and to care that they said it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, that's my why. That's why Operation Literacy exists, is just to try and provide that vehicle. There's so many obvious benefits to a child that can read, that statistically they're more likely to succeed in life, more than other socioeconomic factors. It matters more. Your reading level is a better predictor of future success than even how wealthy your parents were. That is, just think about that. That's just amazing to me. And it encapsulates really the American dream. If we can teach our kids how to communicate, how to express themselves, and how to synthesize information, they're going to succeed in life. They're going to be a creative surgeon, a creative attorney. They're going to be a creative engineer. They're going to be able to communicate their needs. They're going to be happy in their relationships. There's so much crossover.
Well, I believe too, a lot of times when we work with children who are growing up in poverty, and I was that child. So that was my background. And I think, how do we ask these children to imagine themselves on a college campus or to imagine themselves receiving a diploma if we have never taught them to imagine at all? Then all they know is their reality. And so it becomes critical that we teach story.
Creative writing, Dr. Lloyd Eldridge, he's a emeritus professor at BYU and just kind of known as kind of a grandfather in phonics and all of these other things. He says that creative writing is the highest form of literacy. If we can teach children to write creatively, they're more likely to, it displays all of the attributes that we need to put together a great research paper or an argumentative essay. If we can teach children to write creatively, it sets them up for success in all other areas in language arts. So why are we defunding these programs in high schools? That's why we exist.
At the end of the day, this is children and this is their future. And we don't soapbox about that.
No.
All right. For you, Jen, with your writing, your engagement with young people, all that you do from a spiritual perspective, what do you believe you have been called to create? What is your purpose, your work?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I think I'm a flashlight. I know that's a weird answer, but I think my purpose is to shine light on a problem because people are drawn to light. And I've seen this in our organization right now in Operation Literacy. We have almost 40 people that work under the umbrella of Operation Literacy, and the majority of them are 100% volunteer. And what happens when we shine a light on something that's important? People gather to it. People pay attention to it. Truth works that way. That's why people listen to 19-year-olds who are missionaries, in foreign countries who can't speak their language well or anything like that. They're drawn to light. And I wouldn't profess to have that light that is being drawn to me personally, but as a flashlight and pointing this in the direction that I'm obviously so passionate about, it's creating attention in an area that we really need to focus.
If somebody is listening and they say, you know what, I believe in this too, but I don't have a big light, or I don't know if there's a place for me as a creator at all. What would you say to that person who just feels like maybe their light is a little small?
Do you know, I feel like we disqualify ourselves from so many things in this world. I want to tell you a story, and I'll try and be brief. So I was 27 years old, maybe 28, and I was an aspiring writer. Remember, I had only been reading seriously, like voraciously, for about 6 or 7 years. And I was an aspiring writer, and I wanted to give back to the community. I wanted to validate some teens and thought maybe my writers group would sponsor a first chapter contest at a local high school or something like that. And I thought about it for a minute and I said, I think we can do more than that. And I went into UVU with no publishing credentials, not even an English degree. And I said, I think you need me. And to this day, I still kind of look back, and if I have to look at that like one moment, we talk about 20 seconds of courage, and I want to credit the person who came up with that. I know it was the We Bought a Zoo.
Benjamin Mee, who
That's
author of
right,
the
Benjamin Mee. Thank you. So,
I just
so
wanted to say that quote. So all you need is 20
Mhm.
seconds of insane courage, and I promise you something great will come from it.
Well, and I look back at my life and I go, wow, if I hadn't had the courage in that moment, if I hadn't self-qualified to say, you need me here, you know what I mean? I need it here. I didn't have any qualifications that made me the right person per se, other than a belief in myself and a desire to do good. And so as you're looking to create, stop disqualifying yourself before you start. You start looking for reasons why you are the person to write that story or to create that sculpture or whatever creative endeavor that you're pursuing. You have something to offer that is unique to anybody else in the room, and that is yourself, your authentic, true self. So stop disqualifying yourself. Just go forth and do.
I think that's beautiful. For those listening, Jen, is there a way they can learn more about StoryCon or about Operation Literacy? What can somebody do if they want to know more or even become part of this effort?
Yeah, so you can go to storycon.org, and I'll just give a quick pitch for it. This is going to be the largest literacy event that Utah has ever hosted. It includes some incredible authors like Jennifer Nielsen, but also Jeff Kinney will be there. He's the author of The Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which is kind of incredible. We'll have Marissa Meyer, the author of Cinder. Neil Schusterman, who's the author of Scythe and other books. I shouldn't have started to even try to tell you who's coming. We have 90 authors that are participating in this event, just for perspective. And we have a dedicated teen and tween track. So tween 8 through 12, teen is 13 through 19. And then we have an educator track and we have a general track. So if you are a 35-year-old working your day job that just has always wanted to be a writer, we have a track for you as well. And we also have an open to the public expo hall where all of our signings will happen. So whether you attend or not, you can just come. So that was not the answer to your question. The answer is go to storycon.org and learn all about it. You'll also notice that there's some opportunities to volunteer. There's opportunities to donate so that we can scholarship more kids and hit our scholarshiping goals. And yeah, come on in. The water's fine. If you want to work with us, we have work to do. So definitely fill out that volunteer form if you're feeling motivated.
Perfect. And we'll include the links to that in the show notes. So if you missed it as a listener, that is totally fine. Just check out the show notes. And honestly, like wherever it is that you plug into this universe of being a creator, we need you. We need more voices. We need more of you. So I think we could continue talking for hours. Sadly, we are out of time. Jennifer, you have offered us many amazing things to think about. You've given us this beautiful perspective on our own journeys. There's always something we can do to take the next step. Now, to those who are listening, thank you for your time and for supporting this amazing podcast. I hope you know that your efforts to help others, it does matter, whoever they are. And in whatever way you choose to help, you matter. And I wish to thank LDSMPA and the podcast team for inviting me to participate as a guest host. But please tune in to all of the other episodes this season, where a variety of guest hosts will be interviewing some of their favorite creators, as I have just interviewed one of my favorite creators. Thank you very much, and keep creating.